Okay, so back in our study of the book of Nehemiah after our week off last week. And this morning we are kind of still looking at this idea of spiritual renewal. But alongside that, we're also looking at what Christian leadership looks like in the face of opposition. And so last time we were together 2 weeks ago, and even the week before that, we pointed out that Nehemiah has been called to lead the people of Israel in like a genuine spiritual renewal. And he's been called by God to restore the city of Jerusalem. And so we've covered that, the Israelites were captured by the Babylonians, who were taken over by the Persians. And so the Jewish people have been in captivity in two different empires, but they have at this point been allowed to return to Jerusalem for almost 70 years. And so in the time of Nehemiah, we're about 140 years from the time that Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and the city's still a disaster. And so the Jews have kind of, trickled back, and they have kind of tried to fix some things up. There is a temple that's kind of cobbled back together, but the city walls are a disaster, and the city's defenseless. And Nehemiah has gone as far as to say that the people of Israel are a reproach among the other nations. And so we've started to look at how God is using Nehemiah to inspire and move the people of Israel towards being in a position to be used to fulfill the plan of God. And so a month ago, we went all the way back to Genesis 12 and the Abrahamic covenant, where God promised Abraham and his descendants that he would make them into a mighty nation. And then through them, all the families in the earth would be blessed. And so it's always been God's desire to work through people to reach other people with his love and with his truth. And so God wants to change lives. And, that's cool, but we have free will and we have the ability to say no to God, and we do say no to God. And that rebellion has created all of the pain and the suffering in the world. It's created by us. It's not according to the plan of God. It's according to the rebellion of man. And so Nehemiah has been inspired and called by God to turn away from comfort and turn away from security and away from selfishness to fulfill the plan of God and his promises to Abraham from hundreds of years before this. And we've seen that Nehemiah has sort of found this balance between being a man that's depending on the power of God to accomplish something that's impossible, and being a man that is doing the things that need to be done to be ready to be used by God. And so Nehemiah is really serious about prayer and doing the Lord's work. But he's also very strategic. He's got plans. He is waiting on God's timing, and he is depending on God. But when God opens a door, Nehemiah's ready to act. He's a man of action. And so that's what we're saying that biblical faith really is. It's putting the truth that you believe into action. So Nehemiah gets all of the permission that he needs, and he gathers all of the supplies, and he gets all the workers together, and he finally arrives in Jerusalem, and the place is a mess. And so he takes an assessment of the situation with his real eyeballs. Okay, not a letter that somebody wrote or whatever, but he's looking at the real work that needs to be done. And that's what we talked about last time. And then he goes to the people that have for generations been living among the rubble that is Jerusalem, and he implores them to do better than what they're doing. He appeals to them to not accept this mediocrity. And so Nehemiah's got quite a battle in front of him, and so this is really the first point that I want to make. There's a reality of an automatic opposition. Okay? Anything that you do in this world to bring the love or the light of God is going to bring you into conflict with what the Bible refers to as the cosmos, or what we might refer to as the world system. And so the natural state of our world and the natural state of man is actually quite hostile towards God. And I'm not saying that there are not good and amazing things about man. There are. The Bible says that we're created in the image of God. All right, but if we try to be objective for a moment about the way of the world, it seems clear to me that there's a lot more pain and suffering and a lot more selfishness and a lot more evil that's evident in the world than any of us would admit to there being in each of our individual hearts. All right, the world's a pretty dark place. And I think that this pretty well describes the human condition. And so one of the things that I find so compelling about the Bible is that it explains that we're created for the purposes of love and companionship and mercy and justice, but we're given free will in order to experience those things to the fullest. And so we use that free will to rebel against God. So we have imagined that we are our own gods. And, maybe that sounds a little far-fetched or a little bit extreme. Maybe it's never even occurred to you that you want to be God or your own God. But we do say that we would like to choose what is good and what is evil for ourselves. It's me that decides what's right and wrong for my life. In fact, for a lot of us, it's me that decides what's right and wrong for your life. Okay, we don't want anyone telling us what our destiny is, even if it's God. Okay, no one has the right to tell me what to do with my life. And when we think like that and when we act like that, we have elevated ourselves to the position of God. Okay, we are our own gods. We're doing the job that God is supposed to do in our lives. And as a race of human beings, we have all gone our own way. And we've decided that we're going to decide these things on our own. Okay, which amounts to the simple truth that we've rejected the teachings of God. Okay, and that's just how so much evil and suffering has entered into the world. And so if you're interested in being used by God to teach the truth of God, that God loves us and we need to consider the needs of others as more important than our own needs, and that there's no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends. There are things more important than comfort and money and power. We're created for something bigger than personal comfort and isolation. Then that is gonna bring you into direct conflict with the natural state of man and the natural state of the world, just as it did with Jesus. Okay, this is just how Jesus lived his life. Okay, these were just his teachings, and his life is filled with opposition, conflict. People were constantly offended by him, and they were constantly accusing him. They finally set him up with false charges, and then they beat him and murdered him and hung him up like a trophy, or at least like a warning to others. And his words to us are, if this is what they do to God, then what do you think they're going to do to you? Okay, and so Nehemiah is standing for what God stands for. And if we stand for what God stands for, then there is going to be conflict in our lives. And so you'll see this conflict come up in many different areas of your life. You see it in your career. Okay, so for most of us, the world system that we operate in is set up to get us to believe that we should get the best job possible and work as much as possible to make as much money as we possibly can as fast as we can so that we have the opportunity to retire and live completely self-indulgent lives. And we name that ability to live selfishly freedom. but it's actually a vicious hamster wheel. The more money that we make, the more freedom that we attain, the more crap that we think we need. And we become blind to the reality that we've sacrificed time with our spouses and time with our children, time building into other relationships. We sacrifice love and relationship to the false belief that one day we're going to be comfortable enough to do the things that are really important. Okay, you think that you're avoiding risk by focusing on your retirement plan, but it is the most risky thing that I can imagine to spend your life not doing what's important on the bet that you can buy yourself the freedom to do it later. Okay, most people never find the place, right, where they can manage that. And if they do manage a successful retirement, then they don't actually spend that time doing any of the important things that they didn't do before. Okay, they lounge on the beach in Boca Raton doing nothing at all of consequence. All right, and then we've successfully squandered our entire life. And that's the way of the world. And if you want to go a different way and build into relationships and love, and you want to make God and other people the highest priorities in your life, then you may not get the best job that you can get. And you may not be willing to work all those crazy hours. You may be unwilling to sacrifice time with the people that you're loving. And when you get a great job offer, or you're offered a promotion, but it's in a different city, or it means that you have to travel constantly, you may then actually choose to reject that offer in order to keep from being alienated from your community and your family and the people that God has you working with. And people in general will think that you are crazy. Okay, how could you possibly deny more money, more influence, more power, more freedom? All right. Well, it's because we're supposed to have a different value system than the values of the world system. And you'll find out once you start making decisions this way that there is quite a lot of opposition. All right. For some of us, we could illustrate this very clearly by going into our workplace tomorrow and standing on your desk in front of everyone and claiming to be a follower of Christ. That would be enough to get people riled up. All right, and there would be clear and immediate opposition. But on a smaller and more appropriate scale, when you decide to share with the people around you the things of Christ and the things of God, you'll often experience the kind of opposition that we're talking about here. All right, and so that's the same kind of opposition that Nehemiah is going to be facing here. And we actually see this kind of a lot in raising our kids. As unbelievable as it is, the universe has allowed me to be a parent. And, sometimes as parents, we have to make decisions about whether or not we should fast track our kids by putting them into some kind of gifted program, or by focusing on some kind of thing that's what's going to get them into college or whatever. And I think that we just need to be really careful that we're prioritizing eternal things and relationships. And people will treat you like you're some kind of monster that's not looking out for your children if you refuse to separate them from their community and enroll them in some gifted program at some institution. Okay, academia and being smart is really great, but it cannot even come close to being as important as relationship and sacrificial love. God's purpose for your children may play out in some elite and prestigious setting, but we don't actually put our kids in those settings so that God's will for their lives will play out. We put them in those settings so that our will for their lives might play out, and so that they'll have an advantage in the world system. So we need to teach our kids what's really important. and there's all this pressure to teach them the wrong things are the most important things. Okay, and some of us have kids that we have in all these activities. Okay, we're running all over the place to make sure the kids make it from activity to activity. That's kind of cool because kids can, build all these relationships with different people and with different things. But maybe it comes at a cost for your family and for your home dynamic. Maybe you're driving all over the place and spending weekends on the road, and what does that do to the relationships with the other people in your home? What does that do to your spiritual life? What are you teaching your kids is the most important thing? Maybe you're managing all this stuff just fine. All right, but I think it's really likely that maybe you need to ask yourself these questions and make sure that you're making the right decisions for the right reasons. God and God's work, that's our primary activity. Okay, and God and God's work is our primary extracurricular activity. Okay, if your kids want to play soccer or something, that's super cool. Go to their games or whatever. But first things first, man. Right? It's relationships that really matter. And that brings us into direct conflict with the way of the world. Okay, if you want to serve God and you want to advance the purposes of God in a world that's hostile to the truth of God, there is going to be conflict in a bunch of areas of your life. So anyone who's hoping to be used by God needs to learn how to handle criticism and opposition. It's a really valuable thing that comes out of this passage that we're going to look at this morning. So Nehemiah has to deal with this opposition in a way that's consistent with the teachings of God. Jesus said that we should love our enemies. We're not supposed to fight opposition the way that the world fights opposition. And so even as we find ourselves in conflict, we can advance the values of God into a situation that is hostile towards God. Okay, we just don't wage war in the same way that the world does. Love and forgiveness and mercy and truth remain at the heart of what we're doing, even in our conflicts and in the places that we disagree with people. So we introduced this verse last time. This is verse 10, chapter 2. It says that when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it, it was very displeasing to them that someone had come to seek the welfare of the sons of Israel. So these guys were the people that would become Samaritans. They're not terribly fond of Jewish people or the Jewish religion, and they're very well established in this territory in their own cities, and they were not too happy about the prospect of the Jews returning. And so these are the guys that represent the opposition in this story. And then we also read last time how Nehemiah gathered his people that had been living in rubble, and he gave them this inspiring speech where he tells them that it is time to not be a reproach to the other nations. And God's created this opportunity where they have the resources and they have the people to do this amazing thing, where we can unite the descendants of Abraham to fulfill the plan and the call of God to our people and become a nation of priests from which all the families on the earth could be blessed. And so then all these Jewish people who'd been living in squalor and spiritual mediocrity are inspired to agree with Nehemiah and decide that now is the time to move back towards God. And so we come to verse 19, where it says, "But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arab heard it, they scorned us and despised us and said, 'What is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king?'" So this is the first face of what it looks like to have the enemy mobilized to attack the people that are doing the things of God. And, they just have this very different value system, and it makes them see the people of God as a threat. And we're going to call this first kind of person that is in opposition to God's work the naysayer. All right, so they see this thing happening, and they go on the offensive to stop the people of God from moving forward. And so this is how the naysayer works. All right, they try to erode the motivation that there is for doing the work. In whatever capacity or whatever role you want to do the work of God, there will be people that come in and question your motives and try and remove the security that you have in doing the work that you're doing. This happens all the time. Okay, you start to get a little bit serious about the work that you're doing, and you start to make some decisions that are different than the way that the world would prefer that you made them. And all of a sudden, someone that you know and trust is concerned about you because maybe you're taking this whole Jesus thing just a little too far. Okay, everything has its proper place, and doesn't Jesus just belong in an hour or two on Sunday morning? Right? Maybe another hour on Wednesday night. Isn't anything much more than that slightly extreme? How many meetings do you need to have in a week, man? How about the time that you need to take care of your own needs? What about watching Seinfeld or whatever people watch these days? I don't know. How can you afford to be so involved in other people's lives when there are all these great shows that you can stream on TV? All right, after all the time that you spend working, you're not going to make time to be entertained or numbed. Okay, you're not going to try and get to the next Fortnite tier or whatever. I don't even know what people play now. Okay, so the world insists that there are all these things that are more important than people and relationships. It's more important to have a source of entertainment or a distraction than it is to have relationships. And as Christians, we should stand enthusiastically against that. Okay, we should be very clear that relationships and community and Jesus Christ are the things that we're made for. The claim of the Bible is that we're made for love, not made to be entertained. We're made to be engaged in meaningful relationships with one another. So the naysayers are always pointing out all the reasons why you should quit before you even start. Okay, and this is stuff that's not always coming from our enemies in the world. Sometimes this is from within our own midst. Our fellow believers have developed a cynicism and a hardness of heart about doing God's work. And we often find that when we get the call to move forward and live the way that the Bible describes that we should, we get opposition from inside our family and our friends at church. They're quick to point out that if you really invest in other people, they're just going to let you down. And they're not saying it to help you prepare for the hardship. They're saying it to get you to not do it. Okay, their advice is to avoid investing too much in other people because you're going to get hurt in the end. People just never come through. Part of the problem is that there's a lot of truth there. Okay, but we do not invest in other people so that they will somehow meet our needs and fulfill our expectations. We invest in other people because God has invested so much in us. As we experience the love and the acceptance of God, it fills us up to a point that the love spills out into the lives of other people. We become committed to helping other people in their times of need because God has helped us in our time of need. It's not because we have some expectations of them. It's not because we expect some return on the investment that we make. Don't you know that the people that step up to help other people and to lead groups always get beat down? All right, the best thing is to just kind of lay low and not make any waves. You should just live out your faith privately. Faith's a very private thing anyway. Fire in your heart about the things of God's a pretty dangerous thing. You need to stay away from stuff like that. And that way you'll be safe. And you'll also have no real ability to have any impact on other people's lives. And you will never know what it's like to be used by God to impact other people in an eternal way. Okay, this is one of the great joys of living a Christian life the way that God intended. It's to experience what it's like to have God move through you and know that it's all God. If you play it safe, you're not going to experience that. You'll also hear that people just don't really change after a certain age. But that just isn't true. Okay, God is still God no matter how old you are. And God still has a plan for you, no matter how old you are. You know who I think has the most resources and the most freedom and the most wisdom and is in the best position to live radically for God of anyone in our culture? It's not college-aged singles. Okay? It's the empty nesters. It's when the kids are out and the resources are still flowing, and you have some experience, and you're ready to do something completely nuts with your life for God. Okay, but the world system will try desperately to convince you otherwise. They'll either tell you that it's not possible for you to change at this point, or they will take the position that you have earned the right to be selfish now that you've given your whole life to your kids. All right, so do you see the resistance that there is to making decisions to further the kingdom of God? All right, the whole system is set up to tell you that it's a bad idea. And these naysayers, they never really have anything constructive to offer. They're really just trying to slow things down, constantly critiquing what other people are trying to do. They don't really have an alternative idea. They just hate whatever's going on. Okay, so they point out all the problems, but they don't really offer any productive solutions. They think they're being helpful. They just aren't. They like to question the motives and question the integrity of the people that are doing. This is really the definition of a naysayer. And so they accuse people of doing things just because they want to look spiritual. They say that people do good things just to promote themselves. They tell you that if you were really honest, then you would see that you have all the same problems that everyone else has. Maybe that you're even worse than everyone else. You aren't even a little bit special. All right, there is no way that you should be leading anyone towards anything spiritual. All right, you're just on some kind of power trip so that you can be a leader. It's just an opportunity that you're taking to have influence over other people. And frankly, it would be wrong and messed up for you to call on other people to change when there are so many things wrong with you. Okay, and while the premise here is absolutely true, okay, you and I, especially you and I are unqualified to lead people towards God. Okay, but the conclusion is false because God always works through fallen human agency. Okay, this is exactly the accusation that Sanballat is making against Nehemiah. He's questioning his motives and wondering aloud if Nehemiah is committing treason against the king. And so what should Nehemiah do? It's a pretty disturbing accusation. Nehemiah's kind of homies with the king, right? Artaxerxes has bankrolled this whole operation. And as Sanballat questions Nehemiah's motives, Nehemiah might start to wonder about word getting back to the king that there's something, messed up that's going on here. This accusation's not true, but the consequences of people believing it are pretty bad. If Nehemiah starts back to Susa to convince the king that this is not true, then he would at best lose 2 months of work in traveling back and forth. So if we're always reacting in desperation to the accusations that people have made against us, we'd never get anything done. Okay, we'd be too busy protecting ourselves and our image to do any of God's work. Nehemiah's got a wall to build here, man. And so this is how he answers. says, so I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven will give us success. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build. But you have no portion, right, or memorial in Jerusalem. So as a man of God, Nehemiah does something that's really important here. His motives are being attacked. There's an attempt to tear him down and discredit him. And yet, he never lashes out. He doesn't attack his attackers. Instead, he reminds them of who it is they're really attacking. He's saying that they think that they're attacking him and his motives, but it's God who called this work to be done. Nehemiah basically has calmly said that he's just the labor. The issue that they're talking about, they need to take up with management. All right, so if you're going to attack Nehemiah, then you're just attacking a laborer. Sanballat is going to need to take his questions to God, because Nehemiah is there because God told him to be. It's God's desire to fulfill his covenant promises to the nation of Israel. So, go ahead. Ask God about that and see what he says. Reminds me a little bit of David and Goliath. Right? Little David and giant Goliath. Goliath has all these threats and taunts for the people of Israel, and then little David steps out with just his sling. And Goliath is like insulted. He asks if they think he's a dog, that they would just send a boy out with a stick to drive him away. And, David has this perfect response for a godly leader to have. And he basically says that, Goliath is kind of right. He is just a boy. And all he did bring was this rock. But he also says that it's not himself that Goliath is insulting. It's the God of Israel. And if the God of Israel wants to, then he can give David victory over Goliath right now. Goliath really is big and strong. And it's true that he's well armored. But God is at work here in this place. And that's exactly what Nehemiah is pointing out here. This work is the Lord's work. So he doesn't spend any time at all attacking his attackers or defending himself or running back to Artaxerxes to make his case. Instead, he does this crazy and brilliant thing where he chooses to depend on God. Okay? And he gets to work. He starts building the wall. So the best thing for Nehemiah to do is to continue with the mission that God has given him. And the goal of the opposition force is to interfere with the work that God is trying to do. And so if you keep working, all right, you're defeating the purposes of the enemies of God. And then chapter 3 tells us the details of them getting to work. But chapter 3 is like the most boring chapter in all of Scripture. Except a few places in Leviticus, maybe. All right, how can I say that? Isn't the whole Bible good and powerful and all that? Yeah, but chapter 3 is the description of every family that helps and everything that they do in the process there. Chapter 3 is where we read which section of the wall each guy worked on. It's pretty dry. But why is it there? All right, well, the reading itself may not be exciting or insightful, but the point that it's making actually is pretty cool. Okay, God's giving credit to the people who have committed themselves to doing the work of the Lord in the face of opposition. Okay, these families are memorialized for all of eternity for their faith and their willingness to engage in God's work. All right, this is just one example. It says, moreover, next to him, the Tekoites made repairs, but their nobles did not support the work of their masters. You wouldn't want to be one of the nobles. Joiada, the son of Paseah, and Meshullam, the son of Besidua, repaired the old gate. They laid its beams and hung its doors with its bolts and its bars. And so this goes on like this for page after page. Man, it seems eternal. And I'm not going to read it all. I'm not going to go through it verse by verse. But the point is that we're someday going to get to heaven. And we're going to meet these guys who repaired the old gate of Jerusalem. And while we're hanging out with one of them, they're going to ask the question, hey, dude, did you check out that passage in Scripture about me? Right? These dudes in the Bible. Okay? And they're probably still just incredulous about that. Okay? But God is really good. And he likes to have these things recorded for future generations to check out. Because these guys were willing to commit themselves and risk themselves for the work of God. God's giving them credit and pointing them out for us to learn from. These are examples of faith for us. And the thing that we really need to bring away from this part of the passage is that the best answer to the naysayer is just to get the work done. Okay? Offer something constructive or get out of the way, because this is God's work that's being done. So then we get to chapter 4. And it says, "Now it came about that when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious and very angry and mocked the Jews. He spoke in the presence of his brothers and the wealthy men of Samaria and said, 'What are these feeble Jews doing? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones?'" I mean, to me, it doesn't sound like very good trash talk. All right, maybe there's something that's lost in the cultural transition. Maybe it's a language thing. Maybe the human condition has devolved into something different than what it was here. Maybe we're better at hurling insults at one another than we used to be. Can they build it in a day? Just seems like a weird and ridiculous thing for him to say. But the point and the sense here is that he's attacking them and he's insulting them. All right, and so this other guy gets in on it a little. It says, "Tobiah the Ammonite was near him, and he said, 'Even what they are building, if a fox should jump on it, he would break their stone wall down.'" Ooh, snap. Right? At least I get that one. It's clearly a jab. And so these guys are doing whatever they can to discourage the people that are doing God's work. They're mocking them, okay, and mocking the work that they're doing. And mocking is more intense and it's a more personal effort to discourage, right? The naysayer is kind of trying to erode your motivation. The mocker is attacking the people themselves and the nature of the work. And the mocking is not just directed at what you're doing. It's also directed at who you are as a person. Okay, and so if you want to stand in opposition to the world system and do the things that God is asking you to do, then you can expect that you will become the target of personal attacks. It's just the nature of the battle that we're engaged in. Okay, and these attacks are often an effort to get you to discredit yourself and bait you into sin where you will lash out in defense of yourself. When people start to attack you personally because of God's work that you're trying to do, it can sting. Okay, and sometimes it hurts pretty bad. It can hurt to be told that you're not competent. Okay, it can hurt to be told by people that you care about that you're not qualified. It can hurt to be told that you're too soft on, whatever thing, or too rigid about whatever thing, or that you're selfish. All right? And there is always the temptation to attack in return the person that is attacking you. But if you do that, you have failed to accomplish the purposes of God. And your credibility and ability to do the work are damaged by responding that way. Okay, so instead of doing that, check out what Nehemiah does. He turns to God in prayer. "Hear, O our God, how we are despised." Many of us could learn a lot from this. All right, when we're attacked, we need to turn to God before we turn to defend ourselves. We need to tell God that we're being attacked and we're hurt and we're despised. We need to let God know that we're uncomfortable and hurt and we don't like it very much. But we understand that there's a spiritual battle here and, we're drawing some fire in that battle. We need to express ourselves to God. return their approach on their own heads and give them up for plunder in a land of captivity. Okay, Nehemiah just went a little dark. All right, that was maybe a little bit harsh. Not as harsh as I would have gone, but still. Okay, so he's saying that the Jews have been through this thing where there was 140 years in captivity, and he's praying that God would do that to these people. Let them know what it feels like. And so really this is Nehemiah not being very nice. But he's saying this to God, not to the people. All right, and God's a very big God. He can handle it. Okay, if there's anyone that you can vent to, it's God. All right, it can even be appropriate to share your negative feelings with God. He can certainly take it. And it's far more appropriate to share them with him than to vent to other people. Okay, you ever read the book of Psalms? It is filled with the leaders of Israel turning to God and telling him how much they hate the people of Israel. Okay, and God's just like, let it all out, man. It's actually pretty cool. Okay, God wants the real you to express what's on your heart to him. Let it fly, man. You're not going to do any damage to God. You're not going to surprise God with the negative things inside of you. Okay, you're not going to hurt his feelings or drive him away. It is always appropriate to relate to God in a real way. Okay, he's not impressed if you pretend to be super holy while you're praying. Okay, he actually knows the real you, and he's been watching the whole time. And if you'll vent to God, then you're a lot less likely to vent at the people that are opposing you. And so this ability to vent to God is a provision for us that we have in prayer. Nehemiah actually gets worse here. It says, do not forgive their iniquity, and let not their sin be blotted out before you. All right, so Nehemiah is pretty invested in this project, and he's pretty mad about people making fun of him for this project. And he's very bothered by what's going on. And he basically just asked God to take these people captive and then send them to hell. Okay? Nehemiah's hurt, and he's ticked off. But he deposits all that in just the right place. He lays it at the feet of the just and righteous God. So God can certainly avenge his people if he chooses. But God also loves Sanballat the Horonite. God made that guy too. And as good and righteous and, just as God is, he's the only one in a position to sort this out correctly, right? And Nehemiah gets that. So rather than take vengeance for himself, he turns to God and he dumps the emotion out on him. He asks God to do this because they've demoralized the builders. Okay, so it's much better to be honest and leave these feelings in God's hands than get baited into the trap of defending yourself. All right, so we built the wall, and the whole wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. And even though all this stuff is happening, they didn't turn away from the work that God had put before them. All those insults and all that negativity increase the resolve of the workers to do the work that God has called them to. Now when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites heard what the repair of the walls of Jerusalem went on, and so they're doing all this stuff to oppose the work that's happening, but the work is progressing, and at a pretty rapid pace. The walls are up to half their height. And that the breaches began to be closed, they were very angry. All of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. So now the way to solve this problem is to actually pick up weapons and drive these people out of here. All right? And so they're going to threaten the people of God with violence. And actually, we're not exactly exempt from this kind of thing. Okay, so you may kind of feel like this kind of thing doesn't really happen anymore. but it does. Yeah, but not in this country. Yeah, it does. Okay, when naysaying and mocking fail, you can at least expect the threat of an attack. It's extraordinary how quickly even people in a church can come to the place where they will threaten violence in order to stop the work from moving forward. And now, admittedly, violence is not the same kind of like universal solution to problems for us that it was in the time and place of Nehemiah. But often just the hint or the threat of violence is enough to derail the work. Okay, the threat may push us over the edge. We may decide that this is all, this is too much. We're done. Okay, or we may start lashing out in the belief that the best defense is a good offense. Okay, Nehemiah may have even thought about going back to the king and asking for more men. But if he had done that, the work would have come to a stop. And really, Artaxerxes is not the final authority here. God is. The king didn't commission this work to be done. The God of heaven did. All right, and so verse 9 again says, "But we prayed to our God." Again, Nehemiah turns to management. All right, and he wisely responds to this threat by turning to God for guidance. "And because of them, we set up a guard against them day and night." So there's again this balance that we see in Nehemiah's approach to doing God's work. He is praying, all right, but there's also planning and strategy and wise behavior. Just because he shot out a prayer doesn't mean that he's not going to set up a guard. Okay, it's both of these things working together. This is the thing that's so wise about the leadership of Nehemiah. "Thus in Judah it was said, the strength of the burden bearers is failing, yet there is much rubbish, and we ourselves are unable to rebuild the wall. Our enemies said they will not know or see until we come among them, kill them, and put a stop to the work. When the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times, they will come up against us from every place where you may turn." So the threat of violence is ramping up here. There's almost no doubt that there's going to be an attack. And so then I stationed men in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places, and I stationed the people in families with their swords, spears, and bows. When I saw their fear, I rose and spoke to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people. "Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses." And so he says to remember that this work that we're doing is the work of the Lord. We should expect hostility and threats, and we should be wise enough to move in appropriate ways and guard ourselves against those threats. But we have to stay together and keep working and fight for the purposes of God. And so fear is always the enemy's goal. Okay, but we have to believe that God is intent on getting the work done. Philippians 1:27, 28. It says, "Only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel, in no way alarmed by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction for them, but of salvation for you, and that too from God." Does it sound a little bit like Paul had some understanding of what Nehemiah was going through? Read the story of Paul's life sometime, okay? He was regularly attacked. He was stoned, imprisoned, shipwrecked, bit by a snake, stubbed his toe. All right, dude understood hardship and opposition and pain. Okay, but he also ran the race that God put in front of him to win. And he didn't stop. Okay, he did not stop doing what God called him to do. And it says in Nehemiah that when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, then all of us returned to the wall, each one to his work. From that day on, Half of my servants carried on the work, while half of them held the spears and shields, the bows and the breastplates, and the captains were behind the whole house of Judah. Those who were rebuilding the wall and those who carried burdens took their load with one hand, doing the work, and the other holding a weapon. As for the builders, each wore his sword girded at his side as he built, while the trumpeter stood near me. I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is great and extensive, and we are separated on the wall, far from one another. At whatever place you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we carried on the work, with half of them holding spears from dawn until the stars appeared. At that time I also said to the people, let each man with his servant spend the night within Jerusalem, so that they may be a guard for us by night and a laborer by day. So neither I, my brothers, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us removed our clothes. Each took his weapon, even to the water. So this is like our standard picture of the book of Nehemiah, okay? And it's an incredible picture of doing the work of God in a hostile culture. You carry your load in one hand and you're ready to fight with the other, all right? We are in a fight. May not always or even ever be a physical fight. It's a spiritual fight. It's a fight of ideas. It's a fight over what's true. It's a fight over what really matters and what the purpose of life is. It's a fight to find real meaning and purpose for ourselves and for other people. And it's a fight to help other people move towards the work of God. Okay, there is no worthwhile work that goes unopposed. And if we're really interested in having a community of people that are living out the purposes of God in a way that will have real impact on our city, then some personal sacrifices are going to be needed. Okay, we're going to have to sacrifice some of our personal comfort and some of our peace. And we'll have to set aside some of our personal desires. Okay, there will be some times of rest and some times that are enjoyable. But we can no longer live for those times. Okay, we need to live for sacrificial love, and we need to live for truth, and we need to live for the grace of God and trusting that He's going to work through us and bring us into the middle of battles and then through to the other side of those battles. So to close out this morning, I want to think about this in a practical way. There are spiritual leaders all around you. Okay, there are people that are trying to pull others towards a goal that God has pointed out to them. And these people are nowhere near perfect. Okay, your group leader can probably be a jerk sometimes. I'm some of your group leader. All right? Maybe insensitive at times, whatever. Okay, but you can support these people because they've stepped out in faith, in the full knowledge that they are not qualified to help you to get in line. Okay, they are not qualified. They can't move you really to God's will and God's plan for your life, but they've stepped out anyway. And God is able, therefore, to move them into closer alignment with His will. Okay, so Hebrews 13 says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable for you. Now understand that I hate the word obey as much as anyone else does. Probably quite a bit more. All right, we're kind of okay if we're told to obey God, but this is talking about these people. Okay, this is talking about the people in your community that stand up and are willing to help fight this fight. And what it's saying is that they deserve our trust. Okay, this word pytho really means assurance. So be assured. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Human leadership is very, very flawed. It's very fallen. But God has chosen to work through human agency, and people who stand up and are in this fight need support, need the support of their friends and their family and the body of Christ. Okay, you could rightly complain about any number of things. You could say that certain things are wrong or that they're bad or could be better or whatever. But if we would rally around the purposes of God and the people who are trying to accomplish those purposes, we could continue the work. All right, and it would make extraordinary progress. All right, this says that these leaders keep watch over your souls and that they will give an account before God for the work that they do. So don't make their work harder. All right? So think twice before you become a mocker or a naysayer. Think twice before you criticize the direction that people are heading or before you call into question the character of the people that are trying to do the work. If you have an idea that is more constructive or more productive to offer, then offer it. But don't just complain and say that people are wrong all the time. Okay, why not pick up an oar? Whoops, I missed one, didn't I? Let's go back. I'm not done. There we go. Why not pick up an oar and help row the boat? Okay, leading church groups is a little bit like being in a canoe. Okay, there are lots of people in the canoe, and there are plenty of paddles for all the people in the canoe. Okay, but a lot of the paddles are laying in the bottom of the boat. Okay, some people are paddling and some people are not. And as a leader, there's really not that much greater an experience you can have than for somebody who's not rowing to pick up an oar and start to row. They start to help. Actually, they're not helpful at first, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like when the kid starts rowing, doesn't help. But they're trying, and they learn to do it. Okay, it's an awesome and beautiful thing. And, you know that these people are about to experience the blessing of being used by God in the lives of other people. And so we're all in this together. All right, we're moving together to a place where we can help others and love others so that people will come to know God. There we go. If you're already a leader, then please know that you're not alone. Okay, I often know that it feels like you're alone. All right, but, God's there with you. And there are many of us who are striving for the same thing that you are. And so I'm there with you for whatever it's worth. All right, there are easily 25 people in this room that are there with you. Okay, so Peter put it this way. He said, "Be of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. Everyone who strives to see God's will accomplished will suffer." In Luke, Jesus said, "Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the false prophets in the same way." Do you get that? People are saying nice things, then you're doing it wrong. Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. So we're in a conflict. All right? And we sometimes need to be reminded that Christian leadership or helping people to move towards God is the best and fastest way to intimacy with God. And it's not because God will love you more if you do more. It's because if you engage in the fight, you're going to find out quickly just how much you need God. All right, it's the best way to learn to depend on God. You need to grab an oar in order to experience what this is like. Helping people to move towards God's will for their life is also the best way to live the most impactful possible life. Putting yourself in a position to be used by God is a lot more effective than operating under your own power. All right, you'll have tremendously more impact with God working through you than you ever would otherwise. It's also the most fulfilling way to live a Christian life. Nehemiah did not end up living a comfortable or easy life, or a life of privilege. But it was a great life, and a joyful life, and a meaningful life that had an impact on the landscape of eternity. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up with a great quote from Theodore Roosevelt, of all people. He said that it is far better it is to dare mighty things, to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much because they live in the gray twilight that knows neither victory nor defeat.